Competition exists because we like to know who is the best at something. Whether that something is getting a sports ball past your opponents and into a goal, be the most accurate at throwing pointy objects, or be the first to fake stab your opponent, the activity always boils down to a simple objective. Because we live in a world where the laws of physics apply, there are many variables that can favor one competitor over the other in an arbitrary fashion, something you might call luck. Because of this, there is an understanding that in the pursuit of deciding who is the best, a sample size of 1 isn't statistically significant. So competitors have to repeat the objective multiple times, within a certain amount of time, or a certain amount of attempts, to be accepted as the winner. And that's how we get scores. Because they partially happen in the real world, competitive video games are no exception to this, and that includes fighting games. But the question is, how many times do you really need to repeat the objective for people to agree that whoever won really is the better player? Since it can take some time to figure out your opponent, the vast majority of fighting games will ask you to complete the objective, knocking out your opponent, 2 or even 3 times in a match. And the first person to do that is the winner, and therefore the better player, right? Right? Well, that's certainly how I used to play fighting games as a teenager with my friends, 25 years ago. But not everyone agrees with that. And looking at the way things are today, I can only assume that some people have argued that one match, won or lost, isn't enough to be significant. That's why in tournaments you play several matches against the same opponent, forming what's called a set, and that's also why most tournaments are double elimination, I think. It might also just be that people went with that format because fighting games matches are relatively quick, and that showing up to an event to potentially play for less than 5 minutes wouldn't be fun. If there are any FGC historians watching this, please let me know in the comments when and why people started doing sets. Either way, by the time online play became a viable proposition, the idea of playing sets had become the de facto standard. And so developers included that in the design of online play, especially ranked online play. Different games do it differently, but the most common format is first to 2 matches won, or best of 3, same thing. So we end up with this social contract whereby if I accept a matchmaking request to play with you, I am expected to play through the entire set. But outside of tournaments, this is more of a guideline than a rule, since literally by design, the game allows you to leave the session mid-set. But doing so would remain a breach of that social contract, and a significant portion of the player base has a problem with what they call people who one and done. There are a few aspects of this I want to explore, but first, it's important to say this out loud. You are not entitled to another player's time, and it's entirely their right to stop playing with you for any reason, whether you think that reason is valid or not. There's a million possible reasons why someone might need to stop mid-set, for instance because they need to be somewhere else, or because of factors outside of their control. And you'll never know the actual reason unless you are able to actually speak with your opponent, and most fighting games don't let you voice chat with randoms. Thank fuck for that. So for the rest of the video, when I'm referring to people who won and done, I'm only talking about people who bail in the middle of the set only to continue playing the same game with someone else. We need to start by recognizing that there are several kinds of one and dones, some of which are, arguably, less problematic than others. First of all, we have people who leave after the first match, the win quitters and the lose quitters. Unless the connection is so bad that playing the game is a genuinely poor experience, or unless the opponent has remained passive for most of the game, I find it really hard to explain win quitting as anything other than being afraid to lose the internet point you just won, especially if you did it by the skin of your teeth. The same goes for people who leave the set on a draw. If you won, give your opponent a chance to run it back. If your first win was easy, then it might be 3 points. If it wasn't easy, then your opponent is providing you with a challenge that is appropriate to your skill level, and that is experience you will benefit from in the long run. I understand that some people care about their rank points so much, they will do whatever it takes to make that number go up. But if you artificially inflate your rank, you're just going to make life harder for yourself, as the matchmaking system will put you up against people who are a lot stronger than you are, increasing your chances of losing, the very thing you were trying to avoid. Lose quitting after the first match, however, is in my opinion a completely different beast. And full disclaimer, I am no stranger to lose quitting, so at the risk of sounding like I'm trying to defend behavior that some might consider undesirable, allow me to explain. Let's start with what the problem is with lose quitting for the player doing it. As we discussed earlier, one match is arguably not significant enough to say that the other player is better than you. Even if you got steamrolled in the first match, maybe the opponent just got a lucky guess, or maybe the next match will be the moment where you finally figure out how to deal with that character's bullshit. But if you drop the set now, there's just about zero chances of that happening in the near future. There is a cliché saying that in fighting games, you are the protagonist of your own shonen anime. A common trope in that subgenre is when the main character gets nearly defeated by the villain, only to unlock some new skill or understanding and win the day. So it's very fitting of that comparison to encourage fighting game players to not give up and try to make a comeback, because underdogs are hype. I wouldn't say it happens on the regular, but it happened often enough that I really cannot count the number of times I won a round with only a pixel of health left, sometimes with my opponent's entire health bar left to delete. So how is it that someone who knows that this kind of miracle is possible sometimes decides to just give up? Well, another thing that is very shown in anime is recognizing a fight you cannot win and bail out, or admit defeat. Sometimes the skill gap between you and your opponent is so large and the fight so one-sided that it's hard to learn anything from it in real time, so getting wrecked a second time might not be very useful. Here's the thing though, if you don't play against people who are better than you, there's a limit to how much you can improve. So there is some value in getting your ass handed to you. But knowing when to keep trying and when to quit is a life skill, one I wish I was better at. Some people might want to tell you that quitting a low-stakes activity like a video game is a sign of weakness, but I prefer to see it as saving that energy for shit that's actually important. Sometimes when I launch the game, I'm not looking to get better. Sometimes I just want to play with people at my level and enjoy a bit of sparring, without necessarily trying to unlock new skill or knowledge every time. That's in fact the main reason why I play ranked. So when I match with someone I clearly have no business fighting, then yeah, I'm sometimes tempted to lose quit. Generally, if one person is tilted to the point where they're thinking about dropping the set, there's a good chance that neither player is gonna have fun, so it makes sense to cut your losses. I know that pretty much every time I begrudgingly rematched someone I didn't feel I could beat, I regretted doing it. One of the inspirations to talk about this topic was a video from the Score Esports about those games where you can choose to surrender and the question of whether you should. I'll link to the video in the description, but the takeaway for me is that if you're thinking about quitting, you have probably already lost, if only in your mind. Street Fighter 6 got a brief mention in the video for the vote of no contest feature, but the game only offers that option when it believes the connection is too bad and it just makes the match null and void, so it doesn't really count. But it got me thinking about this question. Should fighting games give you the option to resign mid-match? After all, one of the better known metaphors for giving up comes from boxing, another 1v1 fighting activity. I'm going to immediately get this out of the way before you all rush to the comment box. Yes, there is a difference in that in StarCraft, Valorant or even chess, the game might last for another half hour, so it might make sense to resign if victories seem unachievable. While in a fighting game, if you're getting stomped, it's rarely going to last more than 30 seconds. On one hand, I can see the argument that any amount of time going through something unpleasant is too much. But on the other, if your time is so valuable that you need those few seconds back, should you be spending it playing a video game? Sarcasm aside, I do think that it is important for someone to recognize they have been bested, formally say GG's and move on to the next opponent. But that's also a skill that needs training, and guess what? There's only one way to get better at that. Considering no fighting game I know about lets you surrender, that's neither here nor there, but that doesn't change the fact that there are people who don't need to finish the match to know they're not winning it. The issue is that the only ways they have to signal this is by either staying passive, waiting to die, which is fun for nobody, or intentionally disconnecting from the game, the infamous plug/rage quit. Both of which often go against the terms of service of the game, especially the latter one as it robs the opponent of that virtual clout they rightfully earned. By the way, I'm not talking about sore losers and people who bail as soon as something doesn't go their way, because those don't deserve anyone's attention. At the risk of repeating myself, it is important to push yourself through a fight that puts you out of your comfort zone, but sometimes you don't want to play like your literal life is on the line, and that should be okay too. So yeah, I think I'd like to see the feature added, but I also understand why nobody's bothered putting it in, and to be honest, I think fighting games have bigger problems to solve first when it comes to user experience. The designer in me can see that a resign button could be abused by denying the opponent the satisfaction of closing the round, so I guess there would need to be some restriction as to when it can be used. But which do you prefer? Winning a game because your opponent pressed the I give up button earlier than they should have? Or have your game interrupted by a rage quitter? Let me know in the comments. In other situations, however, the skill gap between you and your opponent isn't what makes you want to drop the set, or even the match, but it's a specific character that just grinds your gears, and fighting them makes you want to uninstall the game. Believe me, I know the feeling. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It might be that the character is just obnoxious or objectively broken, or that the matchup isn't in your favor, but 95% of the time, the reason a character tilts you is because you haven't learned how to deal with them yet. I noticed that the characters who annoy me the most tend to be the one I have the least experience fighting against. Now, this isn't my way of saying get good. What I'm trying to say is that when a specific character is giving you trouble, you can choose to learn the matchup, or you can choose to dodge the character and everyone who plays them. Obviously, one of these options will limit your growth, but as I said earlier, not every play session has to be about the grind to improvement. If you play mostly casually and have no plan to attend tournaments, who cares that you never learned this matchup? That's your problem. But it's important to recognize that it's a choice you make. Sometimes I'm matched with a character that I don't really like, and my usual reaction is, okay, let's give that a try. And if at the end of the first match I don't seem to make any progress in learning the matchup, I'm likely to say, nah, fuck this, I'm not in the mood, GG's. But when I do that, I'm fully aware that the stagnation is self-inflicted. It's just that today is not the day, and that's fine. It's not like I'm on deadline. At the end of the day, you do you. But if you can't see a set through to the end, I encourage you to ask yourself why. If you really can't handle defeat, maybe you want to consider a different genre. If now is not the time when you feel like trying to improve, that's cool, but ask yourself when will it be, and make your peace with the implications of the answer. If you are trying, but just get overwhelmed, consider changing your objective before bailing out. If you can't win the game, look for smaller goals. Can you win at least one round? Can you break at least one throw? Can you block at least one mix-up? Can you land at least one hit? Anything you managed to do that you couldn't do before is improvement you should be proud of, even if you're still losing. People say we learn from our mistakes, but at least for fighting games, we get a much better signal from the things we do right. But we have to make sure we recognize them.